Today, we're going to learn how to knit a cozy ball blanket. These are the yarn balls used for knitting the cozy ball blanket. First, we need to find the yarn end. Then, pull the yarn end out of the yarn ball. This is how we untangle the yarn ball. Next, take out the circular knitting needles from our material kit. This blanket only requires one knitting technique, the knit stitch. Hold the circular knitting needles with your left hand. This cozy ball blanket is knitted using the yarn sections. So, when starting the stitches, we can leave a bit of extra yarn for the first section. Start knitting with the second section of yarn. First, place the second section of yarn onto the needle. Next, wrap the extra yarn around the back of the needle. Then, pinch the extra yarn. A loop will form on the needle. Now, take the other end of the needle. Pass it through the loop on the left needle. After passing through, pull the loop tight. Wrap the working yarn over the right needle. After wrapping, slowly pull the right needle back. Take the loop on the right needle and pull it out of the loop on the left needle. Slowly pull the left needle out of the loop. Since all the loops need to be on the left needle, pass the left needle through the loop on the right needle. The first knit stitch is completed. Next, I'll continue the demonstration. Now begin knitting with the yarn section. First, wrap the yarn section from the back onto the left needle. This will form a cross. We need to pinch this loop and take it off the needle. Next, change the direction of the loop and place it back onto the needle. The right needle goes through the loop and then pull the loop tight. Next, wrap the yarn section underneath the left needle. Then, take the loop from the right needle and pull it out of the loop on the left needle. Use the tip of the right needle to complete the stitch. Now, take the left needle out of the loop. Finally, pass the left needle through the loop on the right needle and take the right needle out. The second knit stitch is complete. Now, let's continue knitting. First, wrap the yarn section from the back around the needle. This will form a cross. Next, take the loop off the needle and change its direction. Then, place it back onto the left needle. The right needle passes through the loop on the left needle. Next, wrap the working yarn from below over the right needle. Now, we need to take the loop from the right needle out of the loop on the left needle. Then, remove the left needle from the loop. Pass the left needle through the loop on the right needle, placing all loops onto the left needle. Some of you might be wondering why we don't wrap the yarn from the front to the back. If we do it that way, we wouldn't form a crossing point. It would just go straight onto the needle. The finished blanket would be very loose. That's why we need to work from the back to the front. Next, let's change the direction of the loop.
Now,
the yarn won't be pulled out easily. The blanket will be very firm. Let's continue knitting. The right needle goes into the loop on the left needle. Then, wrap the working yarn from below over the right needle. Next, take the loop from the right needle out of the loop on the left needle. Then, remove the left needle from the loop and insert the right needle into the loop. Now, all the loops are on the left needle. The number of stitches in the first row of knitting depends on the size of the cozy ball blanket. So, when casting on the first row, you can decide according to your preference. We have a formula for the number of stitches, and you can calculate it yourself. To quickly teach you how to knit the cozy ball blanket, I will cast on 10 stitches for the first row to demonstrate.
1, 2,
3,
4.
One loop represents 1 stitch. Next, we need to make 6 more stitches. You can try knitting on your own.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
This completes the first row of casting on. After casting on, we need to knit back and forth. You need to knit from left to right, then from right to left. First, when knitting, be aware that the first stitch of each row does not need to be knitted. Simply swap the first loop on the left needle with the right needle. This way, the right needle will have 1 loop. Remember, the first stitch of every row does not need to be knitted. Next, we start knitting the middle section. Follow the same method as the first row and knit with knit stitches. Insert the right needle into the first loop on the left needle. Then, wrap the working yarn from below over the right needle. Take the loop from the right needle out of the loop on the left needle and remove the left needle from the loop. Now, insert the left needle into the loop on the right needle. This is the first knit stitch. Since the cozy ball blanket is double-layered, we need to knit a second stitch on top of this. Use the same yarn to knit another stitch. Only after completing 2 knit stitches will all the loops be on the right needle. Next, for each loop, you will make 2 knit stitches. Note that for the first knit stitch in the last step, the right needle does not need to be removed from the loop. Simply place the right needle below the left needle. Then, knit the second stitch. For the second knit stitch, remove the left needle from the loop to complete. It's important to note that 2 knit stitches are made in 1 loop in the middle section. For the first knit stitch, the right needle does not need to be removed from the loop. For the second knit stitch, the left needle should be removed from the loop to stop knitting. You can complete the remaining middle section on your own. After knitting, we can see that there are yarn balls on both sides of the circular needles. Because the cozy ball blanket is double-layered, it will look like this. Next, I will demonstrate again. Insert the right needle into the loop on the left needle. Next, take a new length of yarn. Wrap it from below over the right needle. Next, pull the loop on the right needle through the loop on the left needle. Remove the left needle from the loop. Then, insert the left needle into the loop on the right needle. We need to place the right needle below the left needle. Then repeat the knit stitch. Remove the left needle from the loop to stop. This completes one stitch. You can complete the remaining unknitted part on your own. When you first start knitting, we can go a little slower. Once you're more practiced, you can increase your speed. When knitting, be sure not to make mistakes. Since the yarn is quite thin, knitting can be a bit challenging. Now we've reached the last stitch. For the last stitch, you only need to do one knit stitch. Remove the left needle from the loop to finish. During the knitting process, you don't need to knit the first stitch. For the middle part, each loop requires 2 knit stitches. For the last loop, only 1 knit stitch is needed. After knitting, we need to switch the left and right hands. Change direction and continue knitting. Next, let's begin knitting the second row of the bobble blanket. We need to transfer the loops from the left needle to the right needle. The yarn end does not need to be processed. Now we begin knitting the next row. When knitting, make sure not to knit the first loop. Insert the right needle directly into the first loop and place the loop onto the right needle. For the middle section, do 2 knit stitches into each loop. Work 2 knit stitches into each loop. The method for knitting the stitches is the same as explained above. We need to be careful when knitting the knit stitches to avoid making mistakes. You can complete the remaining part of the middle section on your own. When you reach the last loop, only 1 knit stitch is needed. Remove the left needle from the loop to finish. Once the last stitch is done, switch hands. Change direction and continue knitting. First, transfer the first loop from the left needle to the right needle. In the middle section, work 2 knit stitches into each loop. We can complete the middle section on our own. When knitting the last loop, just work 1 knit stitch. Now we have completed 2 rows of the bobble blanket. Next, let's begin knitting the 3rd row. Remember, just transfer the first loop directly onto the right needle. In the middle section, continue to work 2 knit stitches into each loop. For the last loop, work 1 knit stitch. The first part of the 3rd row of the blanket is now complete. Switch hands and continue knitting the second part of the 3rd row. Remember, just transfer the first loop directly onto the right needle. The knitting method for the middle section is consistent with the one explained earlier. For the last loop, just work 1 knit stitch. The 3rd row of the bobble blanket is now complete. We can count to check both sides have 3 rows. Now we have a height of 3 rows. Next, let's begin knitting the 4th row. It's important to note that the first loop doesn't need to be knitted, just transfer it directly to the right needle. The middle section can be completed on your own. For the last loop, just work 1 knit stitch. The first part of the 4th row is now complete. Switch hands and continue knitting. The knitting method for the second part is the same as explained earlier. You can complete it on your own. This is what the 4th row of the bobble blanket looks like when completed. Now, The bobble blanket has a height of 4 rows. Next, let's continue knitting the blanket to the desired height. The knitting method is the same as explained earlier. You can complete it on your own. Now you should have knitted to the length you want. Let's go over some common issues that may occur during the knitting process. The first issue is that sometimes the yarn may get tangled while knitting the blanket. The second issue is that you may run out of yarn and need to change the yarn. If there's a tangle, you can cut off that part. When changing yarn, you can also cut off the excess. To change yarn, cut one end and tie the 2 yarn ends together to continue knitting. The distance in the middle should be the same length as the normal yarn section. Tighten the yarn ends. Cut off any excess yarn. Alternatively, you can use a lighter to burn off the excess yarn. This makes the blanket more secure. This is the method for joining and changing yarn. It's really simple. Since the blanket is quite large, it's impossible to finish it in one day. If you want to stop knitting, remember to pull the circular needle tight. Then use tape to stick the 2 needles together. This keeps the needles secure and prevents them from falling out. Now, let's move on to binding off. For binding off, the first stitch does not need to be knitted. Just place it on the right needle. For the middle section, knit 1 knit stitch into each loop. Remove the left needle from the loop to stop. In each loop, make 1 knit stitch. You can complete the middle section on your own. The last loop is also a knit stitch. Once the last row is finished, you can flip the blanket over. Next, cut off any excess yarn ends. Then, pull the needles out of the blanket. Pinch the loop with your hand and remove it from the needle. Turn the loop in one direction and enlarge it. Pull the corresponding pom-pom through the loop. Do the same for the second loop. Pull the pom-pom out of the loop. Pinch the loop and remove it from the needle. Then pull the loop to the maximum size. Turn the loop in the opposite direction and pull the pom-pom out of the loop. For the remaining loops, follow the same method to complete them. You can finish the rest on your own. For the last loop, use the same method to pull the pom-pom out. Now Now remove the needles. The blanket may still be uneven. You can swap the positions of the pom-poms on the edges to make it look better. This is what the pom-pom blanket looks like when it's finished. It's double-layered. Any yarn ends like this can be cut off. After cutting them off, you can burn the ends with a lighter, or you can hide the yarn ends inside the blanket. The kit includes 4 black pom-poms. Each pom-pom has a rubber band at the top. So, how do we attach them? A simple method is to take 2 pom-poms from the corners of the blanket. Then, slide them onto the rubber band. You can wrap it around 3 times to make it more secure. You can use this method to attach all 4 pom-poms. This makes it very sturdy. Now your blanket is finished.
Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da.